Seth Harp begins the podcast by recounting the shocking case of Billy Lavine, a Delta Force operator found murdered alongside Timothy Dumas on a remote training range at Fort Bragg, America's largest military base. Lavine's death was reported as a double homicide resulting from a drug deal gone wrong. However, Harp quickly points out that the circumstances surrounding Lavine's death were anything but ordinary. Lavine, having extensive experience within America's most secretive special operations community, lived a complicated double life that eventually led to his untimely demise in 2020. Digging deeper, Harp reveals Lavine's terrifying background, including an earlier incident where Lavine fatally shot his best friend Mark Lear, another Green Beret, in front of Lear's young daughter. Despite clear evidence, local authorities and military investigative bodies covered up the murder, granting Lavine impunity. This unprecedented leniency toward a decorated special operator casts a dark shadow over Fort Bragg's justice system and raises questions about accountability within elite military units. Delving into the entity Lavine belonged to, Harp explains Delta Force as a mysterious and profoundly secretive Army unit under the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC. Created in the late 1970s primarily for hostage rescues and counterterrorism, Delta Force focuses heavily on clandestine and covert operations, often operating in black missions with little public knowledge. Unlike Navy SEALs or Green Berets, this unit maintains a code of silence, shunning media exposure, book writing, or public commentary. Harp emphasizes that although Delta Force operators possess extreme physical fitness and tactical skill, the unit's culture has noticeably declined over the past 2 decades, significantly influenced by prolonged wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Their covert nature shields troubling behaviors from scrutiny, making it difficult to understand the full scope of their internal struggles and operational realities. One of the most disturbing revelations Harp offers is the widespread normalization of drug use and trafficking within Fort Bragg's military community. Lavine was reportedly smoking crack cocaine daily, even as he maintained his operative training schedule, a fact that surprised Harp given the extreme physical demands of the unit. This rampant drug abuse extends beyond Lavine and infects the broader Special Forces community, including other elite units stationed at Fort Bragg. Harp paints a grim picture of a base saturated with illicit substances, drawing parallels between the seemingly insurmountable drug problems in civilian America and the military. He recounts cases where military police themselves were involved in drug dealing, and allegations surfaced of large-scale cocaine trafficking networks operating within and near the base. Harp asserts that despite military drug testing protocols, these measures are often ineffective or circumvented, partly due to the perceived value and untouchability of seasoned operators who have completed multiple deployments. The murder of Lavine and Dumas is not an isolated event. Harp uncovers a larger pattern involving over 20 military-affiliated murders since 2020 tied to the Fort Bragg Special Forces community. Many victims were either soldiers themselves or directly involved with the military culture surrounding the base. The killings resemble the workings of an internal cartel or clandestine network, where retaliation, rivalry, and criminal enterprises blur the lines between military duty and lawlessness. Harp stresses the role of a third party in the double murder, pointing to theories that Dumas may have been hired as a hitman before being eliminated to silence witnesses. The case is further complicated by recent government indictments of a young man for the murders, an accusation widely disputed by sources close to the case, who see it as a potential frame-up. Without transparency or effective investigation, these crimes remain emblematic of a deeper institutional rot. Throughout the interview, Harp sheds light on the broader mission context within which these stories unfold, especially the use of assassination as a tool of U.S. warfare and statecraft. He recounts how, after 9/11, President George W. Bush signed classified orders effectively reversing decades of assassination prohibitions, sanctioning night raids and targeted killings in countries like Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and Somalia. These lethal programs are primarily executed by units like Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. They employ a nebulous targeting process that lacks accountability, often resulting in questionable kill rates and collateral deaths. Harp notes that this escalation towards clandestine assassinations marks a significant historic departure for the U.S., challenging previous norms of open battlefield engagement and raising ethical concerns about the conduct of black operations on a global scale. Harp draws a critical connection between the war in Afghanistan, the international narcotics trade, and the devastating impact on American society. He explains that between 2001 and 2021, Afghanistan produced over 90% of the world's heroin supply. Despite U.S. involvement, heroin production rose exponentially under U.S.-supported regimes known for drug trafficking, with little effective intervention on America's part. The Taliban, ironically depicted as ruthless extremists, had originally suppressed opium production prior to the U.S. invasion and resumed such eradication efforts after taking power again in 2021-2. 3. Harp highlights the hypocrisy and failures of U.S. policy, which enabled opium production to flourish, fueling the fentanyl and opioid overdose crises that have become leading causes of death in the U.S. The sophisticated cover-ups and denial by agencies like the DEA compound the tragedy and obstruct accountability. Beyond drug use, Harp exposes systemic corruption involving weapons theft and trafficking within the military ranks around Fort Bragg. Supply officers like Timothy Dumas was deeply entangled in these illegal activities, moving heroin and stolen military-grade weapons, which find their way into the hands of Mexican drug cartels and other criminal networks. Harp reveals that military investigative agencies often appear ineffective or complicit, with many cases quietly dismissed or barely punished. The complex Army hierarchy and the secretive nature of special operations units create institutional protection that shields offenders. This collusion between drug, weapon, and military channels underscores a failure of governance within the most pivotal elements of U.S. defense. Harp's exploration into the psychological toll borne by operators like Lavine unveils the deep moral injuries inflicted by prolonged exposure to war and covert operations. Lavine suffered severe ptsD, moral disillusionment, and substance abuse, internalizing a growing skepticism about the righteousness and purpose of the missions he conducted. His downward spiral personifies what Harp argues is a widespread malaise in the ranks. This sense of moral injury results in fractured identities, fueling behaviors that spiral toward violence and self-destruction. Combat veterans, contrary to popular media portrayals, are often among the most vocal critics of U.S. foreign engagements, reflecting their unique insight into the futility and ethical complexities of these conflicts. During the conversation, Harp critiques the overall decline of the U.S. military's operational readiness and institutional integrity. Drawing on observations from events like the 2019 military parade in Washington, D.C., he notes the presence of aging equipment and poorly coordinated troops, signaling deeper problems within the armed forces. Recruitment shortfalls, lack of qualified personnel, and a shrinking Army compound concerns about the future effectiveness of U.S. military power, especially when compared to emerging powers such as China. The culture of drug abuse, internal crime, and command negligence only further erodes the image and capabilities of what many regard as the world's most powerful military. Harp and the host engage in an intense critique of current American drug policy. While Harp admits to not supporting a traditional war on drugs, he underscores the catastrophic consequences of America's failure to properly address addiction, which has devastated urban and rural communities alike. He contrasts U.S. treatment programs with the Taliban's uncompromising detox approach, arguing that American programs suffer from inefficacy and profiteering. The harsh reality that opioid withdrawal, though uncomfortable, is survivable without medication contradicts the prevailing medical consensus that tends to favor long-term substitution therapies. Harp's commentary points to political and economic entanglements in the drug treatment industry that inhibit effective solutions, leaving many addicted Americans trapped in cycles of dependence. Harp challenges conventional narratives about Mexican drug cartels, painting a nuanced picture that disputes the simplistic Hollywood portrayal of monolithic, hierarchical cartels. Drawing from academic research, he describes the drug trade in Mexico as loosely organized, market-based, and deeply intertwined with corrupt state forces, including the military, police, and political elites. This partnership between state actors and traffickers undermines U.S. efforts to combat drug smuggling and complicates policy. Harp highlights that top figures like El Chapo were never effectively stripped of assets or power, suggesting that the drug business is a joint enterprise with vested interests in both Mexico and U.S. governance structures. This complexity makes direct confrontation operationally and politically challenging. Throughout the interview, Harp expresses frustration over limited transparency from military authorities and the Department of Defense. Attempts to engage with Pentagon officials or JSOC Public Affairs yielded little to no response, reflecting standard policies of non-comment on special mission units. Even congressional probes seldom translate into concrete reforms or accountability. This pervasive secrecy enables criminality and cover-ups within elite units, leaving journalists and the public dependent on whistleblowers and unofficial sources. Harp's investigation demonstrates both the courage and difficulty of exposing truths concealed behind layers of classification and institutional protection, highlighting the essential role of independent reporting in holding power to account.